Okay, dokie. Well, hello, everybody. Um, say hi if you're coming in. So I know there's actually somebody there listening to me, although I am quite used to talking to myself at times. Well, hi, everybody. Good. Hi, Mark. Good. I'm not on my own. Oh, there's quite a few people coming in. Victoria, Kim. Hello, Dawn, Zoe, Craig, Mary. Hello, hello, hello. Good. Hi, Julie. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Denise. Hi, Hosanna. Hi, Donna. Oh, hi, Donna. Hi, also. Hi. Oh, Linda. Brilliant. Good. Okay. Well, lots of people coming in. That's really wonderful. You're coming in so quick, I can't even say hello to you all individually. So that's always nice. Well, great. Well, thanks for tuning in. I hope you had a good time over the holidays. Great Christmas if you celebrate Christmas. Anybody who knows me and Kieran knows that we love this time of year, and we've had a really good time. Kieran was working a little bit over Christmas, but we love the build up to it, so we had a great time there, and then we managed to spend a bit of time over Christmas as well. So good to see you all. Great, good. Well, I've had the group now for a couple of years, and this is the first time I've actually done something by myself, really, and actually all came about because. Uh, I'm very lucky. I get invited to talk to some at some wonderful places, and I was speaking at a conference a few months ago, and somebody came and spoke to me in the break like they do after my presentation, and said that they'd not heard me present before, and how cool it was to just hear me share my things. So of course, in the group normally, I'm talking to the wonderful guests that we have in. And she said, "Why don't you do some stuff, just sharing some of your thoughts in the group?" And I thought, yeah, why not actually? So here I am. This is the first one. What I'm going to do is, I think, I'm going to pick some individual bits and pieces, the individual topics, and come in and just have a little chat in the group for those who want to come along and kind of join in those conversations, and keep them relatively short, which is hard for me, as you may know. But I'm going to try and keep this to about half an hour if I can. So tonight, I was a bit naughty with the title, right? What do I really think about dog training? But the reason that I chose this as the first chat, and please put some comments in the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on that as well as we chat away. And I'm here. I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on things. What I really want to say at the very start really is this. Things I'm going to share tonight are my views. They're my views on things, and they are mine to have. And uh, we all there's nothing new, I think, under the sun, as they say. I think what is kind of unique to us all as individuals, you as well, and me, is how we interpret these things, and how we make sense of the information we have. And I think what's really important is, whilst these things I'm sharing now are my views on a couple of topics, uh, I'm not the person who created them or invented them, other than the fact that they're my views. What I think I'm trying to say in quite a kind of clumsy way is I'm very aware of the fact that there are some really wonderful people who have been talking and thinking about this kind of stuff for a lot longer than I have, for sure. And in fact, I've been inspired by many of those voices. And I think we have to remember and recognize and stay humble enough to recognize that none of us just wake up in the morning thinking, "Oh my God, I know all this stuff." We learn things, we learn from each other. I know there are people who hear me educate and get some inspiration from that, and then think about, what does that mean for me then, and what does it become for me? And I certainly have my side of things. Sarah Fisher has been a big one for me. Turid and Linda Rugas, Sheila Harper, Linda Michaels, Kathy Gregory. There's a list of people who have really influenced me back along. And now there are people that I really, really love learning from. Amber Batson, Sindor, Sarabi, and Saujanya, the three very much involved from Barks. So I just wanted to kind of put that in at the beginning, really, that I'm not kind of claiming this is my stuff. It's my views on stuff, but it's definitely not mine to kind of claim, for sure. So let's have a little think. So the reason I wanted to do this chat then was this. I get asked a lot about whether I think that training is bad? What are my views on training? Do I think that do I agree with dog training? All these kind of questions I get, and I guess it stems a little bit from an article that I wrote. Oh God, it's nearly 5 years ago now, called "Phantom of the Operant." And again, that was a bit of a cheeky title, really. But actually, I read it back the other day, and really, it was a piece about compassion and empathy, about just taking time to think about what we're doing when we're thinking about creating, changing, or removing the behavior of another sentient being. So I don't think it was that controversial, but at the time it kind of seemed to be. I don't know why. And I guess also being involved with the Beyond the Operant series with the wonderful Kim and Kathy. The important word there, though, is beyond, beyond the operant, not instead of. So I get why people might think of that. So what I thought would be quite good then for this first chat, for me just speaking to the group, if you like, was just to share my thoughts. And my thoughts are these. Do I think training is bad, good, or bad? My actual thought is training's neutral, isn't it? It's neither good or bad. I think we have to be really careful. And my personal view is we have to take a nuanced look at training more generally. And I'm going to unpack a little bit of that with you today. And this notion that it's not good or bad is a really important one for me, because uh, it's how we apply things, I think, that we have to think about. What has definitely happened is in the last kind of 20, 30 years, there's definitely been a swing, a heavy swing towards a very heavy training compliance base. And one thing for us, it's okay in this group. I created this group because I wanted us to think more about the emotional experience. I'll come on to that in a moment. And to think about what more might look like beyond the normal kind of training narratives and kind of training norms. But whilst it's great for us to have these conversations, we have to recognize that the general public themselves are still very much stuck in a very task-oriented training mindset, because they've been put there, right? I think back to when I was growing up in the 70s. I am that old. Back here in the UK, hardly anybody did training back then, actually. And I think not in a very kind of big way from a general public point of view. We had Barbara Woodhouse on the TV. I don't know whether people remember her or not. And people might have gone to some training classes and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, people would just were with their dogs. And I'm not saying that welfare was any better or worse then, but I think we have to recognize that this heavy push towards training and obedience specifically is a relatively new phenomenon, I think, in the last 20 or 30 years, as I say, where the general public have been convinced that the most important thing is to have a well-trained, obedient dog. And the problem with that huge emphasis, and these TV shows, and many of them aren't very good. Some of them are, we know, trying to make a bit of a difference, but most of them are just how to get your dog to be compliant. A lot of the stuff on social media now, especially some of these people on TikTok, it's just, we'll make the dog behave. We will correct their behavior and get them to do what we want them to do. And the general public, it fits their narrative for them. And I think we also have to recognize that a lot of the stuff that gets talked about on the aversive side of the fence, the balanced community especially, they have a language, a narrative that fits where the general public already are. It kind of makes sense to them because they've already been indoctrinated in this notion, well, the dog must comply. Now, the problem for us with this is we all have to take some responsibility to that more widely, I think, as a training community. Because whilst the general public might know how to do some training with their dog, the problem is they don't know much about the dog's lived experience. So they don't know what pain looks like. They don't know what stress looks like. They don't know what body language is about. There was a survey done by the Kennel Club here in the UK recently that showed a really small number of people that out of that big survey actually knew what the main stress signals might mean from a dog. So the general public, whilst we can have our discussions about training and about the pros and cons and that kind of thing, the general public are really stuck. Dogs and their caregivers are being let down hugely by a lot of the information that's out there. And where's the dog's opportunity to let anybody know how they are or are not coping if everything is perceived as being a training issue. So I think this is where we have to have a nuanced discussion about this. Now, I know there are, within the group, I get messages from some people who say, look, uh, even though we're friends, Andy, I can't stay in the group because there's some opinions in there that I just find too out there. I also get people contact me who say that the group isn't going far enough with some of the narratives. And actually, I think hearing both of those things for me helps me to feel that the group is probably where it needs to be then. My late mother used to have a saying, which was, there's no absolutes but kindness. And I think for me, I want to convert that slightly for dogs into there's no absolutes but welfare. And I think it's important that, some people have very specific views on things, and I always try and allow those to be aired in the group. But we also need to think about the middle ground a little bit, I think, and the nuances. And that's why I say, for me, training itself isn't bad. All good. I think it's neutral. I think what we have to do, though, we have to think about a few things. And that's what I just want to share with you today, just my thoughts on these things. I think we do have to separate training as in regards to the teaching of new skills and working with dogs that have some behavioral challenges. And I want to start with the second one first, because that's what I do. I work with dogs with behavioral challenges. I think that's the area that we really do have to think about what is happening when we go in and have an arbitrary view of changing the behavior of the dog. Because this is where it becomes very problematic for me. And this is where I think we let dogs down. If we're just going in and thinking about how we're going to change their behavior without thinking about what that behavior represented for them. And I think this is somewhere that we've got to really start asking some really important questions, including on the training of new skills side of things as well. We've got very geeky in behavior change. There's a lot of science around behavior change. There's a lot of science around how we use training and especially operant and conditioning. I think what this is about now, this little shift that's happening, is about us asking the question, why? Why are we doing it? To what ends are we doing it? To what purpose do we think it's supporting? And if we're going to turn up to influence the behavior of another living being, I think we have to be really mindful of the huge responsibility that has for us. And especially dogs with behavioral challenges, because a lot of the dogs I work with, I work pretty exclusively with dogs who struggle around other dogs or novel people. We have to think about what that behavior is representing for dogs. And I think I use the term relief a lot because I think it's a really fundamental principle. When we feel something, when the dog feels something, it's really important to recognize that, especially those negative feelings and those negative kind of drivers, that the behavior that follows is often a behavior that is seeking relief, seeking relief from physical pain, emotional pain, social pain. Definitely there is a need to feel safe, and we're learning a lot more now about the importance of safety, not just physical safety, but emotional safety and social safety, and also the importance of secure attachments, all these kind of things. And this is where we have to be really mindful, I think, about just going in and changing behaviors because we can, and especially using reinforcement to do that. Because there's a saying that is that the path to coercion is often laid with good intention. And I think that's something that sticks with me sometimes. It's very easy to think, I could probably change this dog's behavior because of the power of, of reinforcement. But if that dog isn't feeling heard for what they were trying to communicate, and importantly, if they're not getting relief for what they were experiencing, we are just changing the behavior. And we're not giving them that relief, and we're not giving them that safety that they might have been seeking. And I think that's where we have to be really mindful about just thinking that the answer is, especially with a lot of the behavioral challenges, that the answer is a training one. Somehow, if we just get the behavior that we want. Instead, I have a lot of concerns about the use of mutually exclusive behaviors uh, uh, with some of these cases. We're going to reinforce a behavior that means that the other behavior can't happen. And so this is where we have to think about things, I think, is a really important part of this. I just want to step back a little bit because one thing we've got to bear in mind is, and people have heard me talk about this if you've heard me present, we're all indoctrinated in what we class as the good bad continuum. This notion that somehow behavior is good or bad or neutral. And underpinning that good bad continuum is this notion that we reinforce the good and we punish or ignore the bad. And that's really kind of, let's say we're very heavily indoctrinated into that from quite a young age. And of course, it's important that we have some societal rules, some societal norms, some rules around social decency and all this kind of thing. But we also have to recognize the fallout from this. And the general public, especially, they're very much indoctrinated into this good bad continuum when it comes to their dogs. We even have a TV show here in the UK called Dogs Behaving Very Badly. And as I was saying a moment ago, the problem is with some of the aversive balance trainers, they play into that because the caregivers are, even though I feel uncomfortable with this approach, my dog's behavior is bad and therefore it needs to have a consequence. The problem is, though, is when we think about this good bad continuum, there's a really simple question that we have to ask, which starts to unravel it a little bit. And that is, who's deciding what's good or bad? It's a really important question. Who's deciding what is good and bad, and why have they decided that? At the conference that I was at a couple of months ago, I shared a little bit about my own story. And I experienced sexualized trauma when I was young, and that affected my behavior. And my school focused on my behavior, and they focused on it in quite a punitive way. So the consequence for me at school eventually was to get the cane, which for those of a younger age, yes, we used to hit kids with sticks. How crazy is that? But yeah, so I got the cane several times. So guess what? I only had to have the cane a couple of times, and my behavior changed, right? Because this is the reality, folks. Punishment works. It works in as far as it gets rid of behavior. And in the very true sense of the word, the behavior becomes less. My parents took a different approach. My parents recognized that they weren't very available because they were working a lot. And, I had everything I wanted as a kid. By the way, I was really very spoilt in that. But actually, what I didn't have looking back was my parents about enough because they were out working a lot and making things work for the businesses and stuff. So their approach was not punitive. Theirs was positive, if you like, which was we'll spend more time together as a family. Contingent, we do love contingencies, right? Contingent on you behaving in a certain way. And guess what? Little Andy, young Andy, I wanted to have more time with my family. So guess what? My behavior changed again because, with that kind of normal view of consequences, antecedent behavior consequence, my behavior changed. But this is really important. And it's a powerful thing to remember. Whilst my behavior changed, what was the real consequence for me? The real consequence for me was going into my 20s, thinking I had to behave in a certain way in order for people to love me. I had to behave in a certain way to have to fit in. The real consequence for me came 20 years later when I had a drug addiction and a breakdown. Because whilst my behavior changed, I didn't feel any safer. I didn't have relief. I wasn't able to find the safe connection I needed in order to kind of offload my story. Now, let's just imagine, and who knows, because we don't have a time machine, right? Let's just imagine that one of my teachers, and it probably would have been a teacher actually, more so than a family member. By the way, my sexualized trauma was outside of the family. It wasn't a family member. If I'd have had a teacher who saw beyond my behavior, who didn't make any judgment on it, who didn't make any condition on it, just created a safe connection with me and allowed me to share my story, I might have the consequence of that might have been that I was intrinsically motivated to share what had happened. And the consequence of that might have been that I didn't have a drug addiction or a breakdown. I think this is important. I think many of people listening now it will resonate for them when we think about it. So when I think about a dog, then their behavior, um, if there's already behavioral challenges there, and especially with the kind of dogs I work with, just changing their behavior because we can shouldn't be the way that we look at getting a progress, or we shouldn't be setting criteria purely on that kind of behavior change. Really, we need to start thinking. These are some of the things I'm going to talk about with some of these chats in the group, by the way. I'm going to build up on focus on little things and just share some different ways of looking at things, because uh you know the dog has a story for us, and it's important that we find different ways, better ways of listening to that story. And this is why people like Laura Donaldson and Sarah Fisher, as I say earlier, and others, some of the people I've mentioned, are really helping us to kind of think about how do we add extra bits into our own ability to turn up to dogs and their story. How do we find different ways to learn more about their survival story? I think that's really important. And if we're going to use reinforcement, and I do, any of my clients listening in now know that I don't use a huge amount of food or reinforcement or training in inverted commas. But if I do something that is specific and I'm targeting it, ideally I want to try and make sure that I've learned from the dog first that's something that's intrinsically helpful and useful for them to be able to feel safe and to cope, because they've already shown me a version of it. I think that's important for us. So I've just touched on that a little bit, and I'm going to look at building up in these little chats different components of that over time, so we can look at them in a little bit more detail. And also, I'm happy to have a chat about anything that anybody wants to talk about. So you can just let me know when we talk about these things. But coming back to this good bad continuum, then I've seen a lot of memes, and I'm not against the memes themselves, and I understand why they're there, because if we have that lens that we look through, then that's what we see. And another thing I talk about a lot when I give my kind of when I give talks and stuff is this understanding that perception truly is everything. How you perceive the behavior of another, how you perceive a situation, how you perceive anything really, will go a certain way to driving your response to it. So actually, then we need to allow ourselves a chance to change our relationship with our own judgments, our own expectations, change our relationship with consequences, change our relationship with training. All these things are really important. So it's not about not training. It's not about not doing this. It's just giving ourselves a chance to step back and think, right, maybe I need to have a reappraisal of some of these things because it's important. And when I see memes that say reward the good, ignore the bad, yes, they make sense on the surface, but I do wonder sometimes with the ignore the bad, remember who's deciding that it's bad? What are we ignoring sometimes? When we think about behavior as an expression of need, so that's the need for connection, the need for safety, the need for relief. The behavior is an expression of self. A lot of this stuff that I see with a lot of the dogs, a lot of the things they're just trying to be that dog, right? They're things that they've been wired in to do, or they're things that they enjoy to do, and we're seeing them as being problematic, but to them it's an expression of self, right? And I think another reason that I'm quite passionate about this stuff is being a gay man. I'm married with my husband, and we're surrounded by a lot of acceptance and love, and that's great. But it's crazy to think that just 60 years ago or so, I could go to prison for that love because somebody else had decided it was bad. So we've got to move away from this good bad thing. We've got to recognize that our brain is very much programmed to want to make quick judgments, and we have to retrain ourselves to move away from that a little bit. That's another conversation, but I'll have that chat. So especially when we're working with dogs who are struggling then. And, I've about half of my workload are what might be classed as dangerous dogs. I know I've got some of my clients in the audience tonight, and I've not met a dog yet that wasn't in pain, and I've shared that before, and physical pain often, but emotional pain and social pain too. And we have to learn their story. I see behavior a bit like a dog painting a picture for us. The wonderful Denise Moore did some great graphics for me for the conference in Kent. For those who came along to the Kent conference, you'll see them. I don't want a dog to ever not behave how they feel they need to within the normal safe parameters. Of course, if they are potentially dangerous, then we have to mitigate for that. But what we tend to do then, rather than let a dog paint their picture for us, we tend to keep grabbing the brush, right? We're going to grab the brush and we're basically saying to the dog, I know I'm going to paint it for you. I know better than you do about what you need to do. So that's my point on training when it comes to behavioral stuff. We've just got to be really careful that if we're going to change that behavior through some form of artificially extrinsically motivated way, we just need to be really mindful that we want to be making sure we're offering that dog the relief they were seeking and not just getting a behavior that we want instead. It's just a really important thought for me. When it comes to training as in teaching new skills, it's a very complicated. It's not complicated. I suppose it is. It's a nuanced point for me. And we have to be realistic in recognizing that there's all sorts of reasons that we teach behaviors to dogs, and I think we have to be mindful of that. One thing that I think is very clear for me is they don't need to be taught stuff in the way that we have traditionally thought so. This notion that somehow if dogs haven't gone to training really early, they'll turn into some kind of crazy feral dog is just not right. And in fact, my own dog Molly in the picture there in the middle there, we brought her up in a very naturalistic way with very little direct training in inverted commas. But that didn't mean that she wasn't learning. And actually, she learned a lot, and she learned a lot of stuff that was really important. For me, the only things I really wanted her to learn, and this is the same for, I don't do puppy classes, but I support people with puppies and as they go through that first 12 months. And it's always worked out really well this way, and I know other people do the same thing. And but I just wanted Molly to learn that she was safe for sure, that my husband and I were her return to safety when she didn't feel safe, and that she would always have the time to process the world around her and engage with the world around her on her terms. The biggest thing I wanted Molly to learn was that she had a voice, and that she had a big voice, that we would hear her. That way, she was able to learn the skills that she needed in order to regulate better and to mature better and to cope with life better. And then we can do what you like. We can train what you like. What we have to recognize, I think, with early training, and I'm involved with a couple of large assistance dog charities here in the UK who have their own breeding programs. And we're really looking at what happens in that first 12 months. Now, this is the point I want to make here. I spoke at the Gun Dog conference earlier this year. And it's interesting, I had a few people message me asking me, why am I talking at Gun Dog conference? And the main answer to that is because they asked me. I'm happy to talk anyway, really. And this is another point that there, by the way, is we can't make people do anything, right? All we can do is talk about what we're passionate about and let people hear it and then see if it resonates for them. And if it does, that's great. And even at the Gun Dog conference, where it's very task orientated, assistance dog work is very task orientated. The dog is expected to do a task. Now, there's a bigger question above all that. Should we be expecting dogs to do stuff like this? That's a different question, though. And especially on the assistance dog side of things, I know people have their views there, but I'm not somebody who relies upon a dog in order for me to live my life. And I don't think I'm the right person, therefore, to make any judgment calls on that. What I would say is the reality is dogs are literally bred to do a job. They are literally bred to do a task. So what we can do, though, is try and influence people about how that is done. And actually, at the Gun Dog conference run by the amazing Leanne Smith, hi Leanne, if you're listening, and there's other great speakers there like Jane Arden, is this, that, and with the assistance dog charities I'm working with as well, is the understanding that, and the science supports it, it's not just being nice to dogs, but if you really need a dog in the moment to do a task, and especially assistance dog work, right? Because that dog needs to do something that could mean the difference between that person, living or not. We've got more chance of a dog doing that task if they are physically and emotionally well regulated. It's just a fact. And I think we have to recognize that. And this is that move away from a task orientated approach to more of a care orientated approach. If you're really into task, which means you're focusing on the dog doing something, it doesn't mean you don't care, but the reality is that if you're focused on task as being the only objective, you can't care as much. You just can't, because you're too task focused. A care approach, and I love this. When I gave this talk at one of the assistance dog charities up at their head office, somebody coined this phrase, which was care first, task will follow. And I really love that, because all a care approach is about learning from the other first, seeing where they're at, seeing whether they're coping with it or not, seeing what they need, seeing if we're going to expect them to do that bit of the task, what does the rest of their existence and life look like? And I think that's a really important thing for us to think about it. So when I think about training, then about teaching new skills, I think we have to recognize that there are different dogs in different areas of our life, our human life, that have a lot of expectations put on them. And I say whether we should even be having those expectations is a different point, but the fact is they are. And I'm very keen then to try and help and be a voice to try and get trainers to think about that then, and to think about things and move away from a very task-oriented approach to more of a care one. I do think that as a community, for us that do training in as far as those colleagues who do puppy classes and adolescent classes, that we do need to move away from this very task-oriented view in those classes, because I think we're letting caregivers down. I think for me, I have my 3 bits, which is learn, support, teach. And I think if we do things in that order, you can't go wrong, really. So the learn is about we learn from the other first. I think that's really simple. We had to learn from Molly first. She came to us as a really fizzy puppy, 16 weeks. She was really fizzy. But as some of you might have seen in a video that I shared for the wonderful Steffi Guy's advent calendars, and also anybody's heard me do some webinars recently, but I think I might share this video in the group as well, actually, of me being out with little puppy Molly and her telling me exactly how she needed to navigate that environment. Now, I've been doing some of this work with one of the assistance dog charities, and it's amazing. Every single puppy can tell us something about the environment, and I think we've got to be humble enough to learn from them first. Because what we have to recognize with a lot of the traditional training approaches, forget about punishment, just even using reinforcement, a lot of the stuff that we teach a dog doesn't have much intrinsic value to them, much internal value for them, and actually often stops them doing the things that are going to allow them to cope with the world around them more. We know that dogs, seem to cope better when they're using their nose more. And yet a lot of the training we do is often visual and auditory, hear what I'm saying or watch what I'm doing. And it's not about us not doing the kind of training stuff, but we also, I think, we have to recognize that some of the things in the early months that we perceive as being a problem that needs training, we're kind of creating the problem first. Jumping up, dogs pulling on the lead, all this kind of stuff. So I think we just have to find different ways of, especially those who run classes, of ensuring that you incorporate aspects so that the caregiver really understands their dog. So learn from the dog first, learn from the puppy. Definitely, if you've got a dog who's got behavioral challenges, we've got to learn from them. We've got to try and work out their survival story, especially those who are using their teeth, because they're really telling us you've got to listen to this story. And then so we've got learn and then support. So the next thing is for us to try and find ways to support what we've learned. And that's even the case for puppies. So with Molly again, once we learned more about her processing, engagement, and exit preferences, I'm going to do a little talk on those 3 words because they're important. Then we had to support what we learned. There's no point in learning anything that's interesting, but now I'm still going to make you do what I want you to do. we've got to support what we've learned and then finally teach. And if I'm going to teach anything, and there are certain things that I did teach Molly, I want to try and make sure that what I'm teaching, and I prefer that word to training as such, but what I'm teaching has intrinsic value, that it's likely to help them with their life. Now, I see a lot of amazing colleagues who do life skills as part of their classes. And some of them I perceive as being truly supportive and being a life skill for that dog. Some of them, though, not necessarily. I struggle to see how that is actually supportive for the dog intrinsically, but also to bear in mind that every dog's different. Every dog has different learning preferences. Every dog goes through different phases and stages at different times. Every dog has different needs. But yeah, learn, support, teach in that order. Learn from the dog, support what we've learned, teach things that we think are going to be useful and valuable to them. After that, I think you can train what you like. And I think one thing to bear in mind is the amount of enjoyment training brings many people. And I think that's important. And also, I do recognize that there are some dogs who love to do the extra training stuff. So I've got 3 dogs, as you can see there. Arthur, my collie stroke Sprolly, he's actually a Springer collie. He will do anything that I ask him to do, right? Because he's very much that dog. And he's like, "Do you want me to do this, Andy? I'll do it." And I have to be really mindful of that with him, because back in the day, we did sort of training with him, and we did agility with him back in the day. He's 14 now, by the way. And he was great at everything, by the way. Anything he did, he was amazing at. He picks it up really quick because he's very bright. But then I started to realize that he was doing it because he wanted to do it with me. And I thought, well, maybe we could do things that aren't just together. And actually, he seemed to enjoy that more, just being rather than having to do something. Molly is very bright. Everything's on her terms, mind you, but she's not really fussed about structured learning at all. Whereas Harley, he loves it. He just adores spending time doing structured learning. So I think we just got to, again, once we learn that from our dog, I think the fact that, there are some dogs who just really love to do work and training. I think we have to recognize that. Maybe that's because of the way that they're bred and brought up, especially here in the UK, who knows? But it's just the reality. We've got to recognize what we've got there. So that's important. But I think the one thing to bear in mind for me, we're going to finish on this. I said I'd try and do half an hour and I've gone over a bit. But these points are important, I think. There's a saying in human psychology, which is there's a difference between what we're taught and what we learn. And I want you to really think about that. The difference between what we're taught and what we learn. So going back to my story of my own my own story. When I got the cane at school, because of my behavior, I was taught something, or I got taught a lesson, as they say. But what did I actually learn? What did I actually learn about feeling safe, about feeling safe in adult relationships, about being able to communicate need? I saw a video recently of a dog being taught a task, and the dog wasn't doing it very well, and the trainer was showing different forms of reinforcement and different reinforcement schedules and all the geeky stuff, and the dog did do the task eventually, and so the dog was taught that. But for me, I saw a dog who's looking quite uncomfortable. Actually, I was looking at a dog who was looking to have an exit and couldn't have one. So what did that dog learn? It was taught something, but what did it actually learn about these kind of things? And this is the difference. The wonderful Mandy Wilson in the group, if you look back in the dog centre care chats, talking about the learning experience, and Mandy's got an educational background working with children, and we really dug deep about the difference between kind of structured learning and experiential learning, and the difference between attainment and achievement. And this is very important. We're kind of obsessed with structured learning as a species. We put kids through school, and many of you listening now will not have had the best time at school because it's not particularly great place for us. Come on to that in a minute. And then of course we put dogs through dog training classes. We have this notion of structured learning. Mother Nature, however, seems to be just as, if not more, focused on experiential learning. And this is why you might not remember too much about what you learned from school from a structured learning point of view, but you will still potentially be affected by the experience of it, about how you were with your how you got on with your peers or didn't, how you got on with authority or didn't, how you felt safe or didn't within the learning environment. And this difference between attainment and achievement, I think it's really, really powerful and it's important. If you've got kind of little Johnny who's in school today, the fact he's in school today is an achievement when we consider that he's hungry because he hasn't had breakfast. He's not slept, so he's tired. He's upset because his parents are arguing all the time, or he's traumatized through his own trauma. But he cannot then be in a good learning state to be able to learn in the structured way that is being prescribed by an education system that is not necessarily thinking about the individual. So then he can't attain what is expected. So that means then he is, which then affects behavior, of course, because frustration comes about very quickly, and especially when you're not in a particularly well-regulated state. So you then get labeled by your behavior being disruptive, being challenging. How many people, kids, are already labeled in such a way at a young age? So then you end up with a young child who's disenfranchised from a learning environment. And we see the same with doggies, right? I think for many of my clients, just being in that village hall is an achievement. The fact that that dog can even focus for 10 minutes is an achievement. But the fact that they then can't go on and tick all the boxes on a clipboard now means they're not a good citizen or whatever it is that the scheme is. And I had a client a little while ago who got in touch because the dog had been excluded from a dog training class. And it was hugely triggering for her because she was excluded from school some 30 odd years before. And she felt very lost. And already she felt that her dog had been demonized. This brings us neatly back to this good bad continuum. How many children are failed by that good bad continuum because they are perceived as being badly behaved and the behavior being the problem? How many dogs are failed, especially through adolescence? 45%, I think, is the figure I saw recently, of dogs who end up going into rescue are adolescent males or just adolescents more generally. I can't remember off the top of my head. But and that's because the general public are ill-equipped to deal with young dogs. And even if they've done a lot of training, they think, oh, I've done all the stuff I've been asked to do. But for that dog, the stuff they need to learn to be able to cope with the world around them isn't there, or they've already learned, I keep being put into situations that I can't cope with and I don't have an exit. So that's what I think about training. I think I've tried to be as comprehensive as I can be. I'm not for or against. I think as a training itself is quite a neutral thing. I do think that we have to ask questions, and I think we do have to think about what this means for us as individual practitioners and caregivers. I think it's really important that nobody should be made or shamed into doing anything. I think we have to create spaces for us to look at things. And I'm sorry if there are some things in the group that some people find are a bit out there. But I think that's important to have that. When I say out there, I mean, some people have very, very clear views on certain aspects of the dog's life. And I think we have to think about that. But also we have to create these spaces and have people think, okay, what bit of this can I do myself? What bit of this rings home for me? I think that's really important. Because even on I spent nearly 3 hours on Zoom going back a little while with a trainer from America who'd reached out. I have quite a lot of aversive trainers who reach out because they find dog centered care or they listen to some of the discussions or they might have heard me on a podcast. And I think it's important that we just try and deliver a message in a way like I've tried to do tonight. And what I found with some of these aversive trainers who have got in touch with me, almost all of them have said that a lot of what they've experienced is people on the positive side just trying to tell them how to do task differently, when in fact they can do task very well. It might not be a way that we like, but they can do task really well. So why would they change? But when they hear it put in a different way, this type of narrative, something moving away from what I've called in the past the operant merry-go-round, this kind of merry-go-round of tools and methods, but actually started thinking in these terms. For a lot of them, well, all of them, that's why they reached out to me, they were already thinking a little bit differently, but they needed to hear something that kind of really made them think, yeah, now I can see what that is. And I think that's what we've all got to do. And I would highly recommend my colleagues who get quite frustrated about things, don't feel that we have to directly go for people or individuals. Just see the strength in casting your own light, because those who need to find it will find it, and that's really important for us. And especially with these discussions that are going on, I know, again, because I get a lot of people contact me, that a lot of the discussions that have gone on in the last few years, when many of us have, including myself, come through our initial education, it's very learning theory biased. You know, you could have, say, a 12 module course and 9 modules are learning theory, right? So it feels a bit scary to kind of put some of that stuff behind, because there's some security in an operant approach, especially, which is like, okay, I know I can change that behavior. You know, the wonderful Craig Ogilvy, I love his approach to behavior cases, because he said to me, you know, because he's such an amazing trainer. He said to me, I have to check in my training brain when I go and see a behavior case, because it's not enough for me just to go there and change behavior because I can. I have to think about the dog that's there with me. But we should have the same kind of we have to have the same kind of approach, even for teaching, for training. I think we have to be better at equipping the general public to understand that compliance and obedience is not the main aim. It's about bringing up an emotionally, physically, and mentally healthy dog. And I think that's really important. And I've not worked with one young dog yet where we've had this kind of approach that hasn't ended up being really well rounded. And if they are sensitive about something, the caregivers understand that. Being sensitive about something isn't a defect. It's just that you're sensitive to something. Okay, good. So one last thing I wanted to share with you, gone on a bit, and because I knew I would, but there you go. Is this: being compassionate and empathetic, which many of us are, we work this way, is not a weakness, in my opinion. It is not. Actually, I think it's the pinnacle of what it is to be human. It's the very top of what it is as part of our human existence. Anybody can just fall into that. I've made a judgment about somebody else's behavior and I'm going to change it. That is really easy to do. And that's what happens a lot in society, of course. To actually step back and think, even though this makes me uncomfortable, even though I might not agree with what somebody's done, the fact that we can be compassionate anyway is actually a strength. It's not a weakness, for sure. And I've got my CAKE acronym. I'm going to do a little chat on CAKE as a separate thing, but compassion, awareness, knowledge, and empathy. And I think it's important that we look at that. Compassion really is about turning up. It's not about condoning. It's not about agreeing with. It's about, you know, regardless, I'm going to turn up anyway. And I think that's a good place to go. I won't go into CAKE too much because I'll do a thing like that. But and also just to bear in mind that we all make a difference every day, whether you're a caregiver to your dog, um, uh, whether you're a professional, you know, to my fellow behaviorists and trainers, we do a hard job, right? We just do. My husband is an end of life nurse, and he says he couldn't do our job. That's quite a humbling thing to hear. So thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. There's been a lot of you here, and I mean, I have a look through all the messages and see what people have written there. But hopefully that's at least that's put on to public my view on training. And I think hopefully I don't have to keep being asked it. But that's it. I think as always it depends, right? I think we've got to start putting the dog in our focus a little bit more, and doing more to bear witness to their individual side of things. I meant to say at the beginning about the emotional experience because that's my lens that I like to look through. And for me, it's the best one, because the emotional experience is how we eat, how we feel, our felt lived experience of how we feel about pain, how we cope with pain, how we cope with experiences, how we're affected by things. That's the emotional experience for me. And the second thing about the emotional experience is understanding that they're all unique to us as individuals. And that is the key for me. The only emotional experience I can validate for is my own. So I know no more about how you think and feel than your dog. So does that mean that I should ignore how you think and feel then and just make you do stuff? And that's kind of what we've done with dogs in the past. So the fact we don't know how they think and feel directly shouldn't be a barrier. That's the point. And we have to ensure that we are grounded in the objectivity of science, for sure. But when we are firmly planted in that objectivity, we should feel confident enough to bathe in the richness of the subjective and the anecdotal, because that's where the individual's lived experience lies. So we have to bear witness to that. And I think that's really important. Well, great, good. And thank you for listening in, and thank you for so many of you coming in tonight. I think I'm really, really chuffed with that. Thank you very much. And I'm going to do some of these as I go along, just sharing my thoughts on a few things, expanding on some of these topics, expanding on cake, processing engagement exits, working with some challenging cases, looking at the role of judgments. I want to really go into that a little bit because it's key, right? Understanding how our brain works helps us to not only navigate being able to be more compassionate for others, but also to give ourselves a bit more compassion, because a lot of the stuff that we judge in our own brain about ourselves, a lot of those voices have been put in there by others. They're not, that's important. Good. Well, thank you very much. And I've got some amazing guests lined up for the new year, and I'll be sharing those out soon. Really interesting topics, and really more discussions about how we just keep trying to explore the emotional experience for our dogs, for caregivers, and for us. None of this is really about dogs, actually. It's just about how we break away from a lot of the traditional norms around behavior for us, let alone our doggies. Right, good. Well, lots of love, and thank you for tuning in. And whatever you do on New Year's Eve, have a great one, and I'll see you next year. Bye.